Right folks, hello and welcome. It's finally here. I hope you're all having a wonderful festive time. And for those of you that are watching the video today, Merry Christmas. But for those of you that are watching this later, hopefully you had a wonderful Christmas and are going to have a lovely new year. This video is going to be the Demonology guide. I'm going to try and do this both in a slightly unique style and a more live version, but also try and cover everything. So this is hopefully going to be your full-on A to Z compendium of Demonology now that Season 1 is out. So with that out of the way, let's go into it. So starting then with gear. Gear's probably a really big part of this that everyone's going to be worried about, and what's best, what isn't. And obviously, as you know, tier sets are here. So tier set's going to take up head, shoulders, chest, gloves, legs. 5-piece. Now, depending on where you look and depending on where you go, your BIS list, so to speak, varies. In my previous guides in Shadowlands, I used to write out a kind of list of what the best gear was, where it would be, and 9 times out of 10 I used to agree with Wowhead. However, because there's so many different things to take into account for gearing now, it's very much up to you as the player. Obviously you're going to need your tier set. You're going to need at least 4 of your 5 pieces of tier. But this massively varies depending on where your gearing is going. So you can see that my character is currently parked by the crafting orders. And there's a reason for that. Because what we're actually going to do is we're going to have a look at some of the crafting gear pieces that actually hold a lot of value. And depending on who you ask or where you go, you might see different answers for this. Now, I have my own personal answer, which I'll explain shortly. But we'll start with kind of what the defaults are. So one key bit of gearing that a lot of people think about is this called the Elemental Lariat. Now, this neck is a really, really powerful neck. It's very strong. Once you have it socketed, your spells and abilities have a chance to empower one of your socketed elemental gems, granting 407 of their associated stat. Obviously, this is the base version, rather than increasing it up to its highest item level. And when you consider that you're also looking at what gems you're socketing, and as a warlock we're prioritizing like haste, mastery, depending on the spec. For demonology focused, it's going to be mastery haste or haste mastery, depending on which of those two we benefit more from at the time. Remember, stats and scalings is a very personal individual thing. But by choosing the Elemental Lariat as a crafting option, you're kind of limiting yourself from some tailoring specific options. But what this allows you is more flexibility in terms of your actual tier set. Because one of the downsides of what I'm going to talk about in a moment in terms of the tailoring options we have is the fact that it directly impacts our tier set and what slots we can use for it. And why am I saying that? Well, we have a few options. And if I actually go into the tailoring myself, because my warlock is a tailor, we can talk about these directly. So you have 2 forms of tailoring schools essentially when it comes to this. If we go into the specializations in draconic needlework, for those of you that remember during the Shadowlands training or preparation videos, we discussed the difference between Azure Weave tailoring and Chronocloth tailoring. Now, in the draconic needlework spec, one of these two will give you pieces of a set. Either the Chronocloth set or the Azure Weave set. Now, if we go to those pieces, scroll down, we have the Azure Weave garments and we have the Chronocloth garments. Now, the Chronocloth, you can have up to 3 pieces. We'll start with Chronocloth. And the slots that they cover, gloves, leggings, or sash, which means that you can obviously have one non-tier piece, but then the other of your 2 pieces of Chronocloth are tier. Now, for Chronocloth, generally speaking, you'd probably look at wanting to maximize gloves over leggings, perhaps, due to the fact that legs generally have a higher stat budget. But again, it depends, because the tier legs, I do believe, are a little bit hit and miss. No, the legs are actually really good, because the legs are haste mastery, which are ideal for us. So they're better than the Chronocloth crit haste. But, as you can see, like, I don't have the gloves. Now, this doesn't necessarily bother me, because I'm actually running the Azure Weave set. Now, before we discuss the Azure Weave set and why I'm running it, the Chronocloth 2 set is as follows. Your set and abilities have a chance to store away moments of time. Upon reaching 20 stacks, release your stored time and gain a burst of haste. So this is basically like almost like a planned star breeze, essentially. Like, you could track your stacks. There's a little bit of RNG, and the timing might not always be perfect. Like, you might not be able to sync it up with a tyrant or things like that. But still, having a haste buff reliably through a fight is nice. Probably quite beneficial as well early doors, especially at the moment when we're relatively low in haste. Like, you can see that I'm currently 394 item level, and I'm running 19% haste, but this is because I've pretty much, like, tried to gear stack as much haste as physically possible through my gear. There's a few pieces that could still be better itemized, like my Staff of Violent Storms. Realistically, I probably want the staff from Algathar Academy if I can get it, or something from the raid, because I am slowly raiding. I do also have Iridius Fragment, but we'll discuss that in the trinket section of the gearing shortly. I kind of want to get the tailoring sets and the tier sets discussed, and then we'll go into trinkets, weapons, rings, things like that. So, the reason I've gone with the Azure Weave set, and in terms of the actual gear set, that takes robe, shoulders, or mantle. Not shoulders, slippers, sorry. So, robe, slippers, or shoulders. And the reason I've done it this way is because the shoulders give haste mastery, and the boots give crit mastery. Now, crit obviously isn't as good as haste, but it's alright, it's passable, because all of our specs benefit quite strongly from mastery, but the set bonus itself, dealing damage, has a chance to grant you piercing Azure Weave, granting intellect for 8 seconds. Now, my current proc, the 402 level 4-star craft, essentially, is granting me nearly 340 intellect when it procs. Now, to put that into perspective, that is an extra item's worth of intellect. Like, it's an extra chess piece worth of intellect, roughly. And that procs multiple times through the course of a fight. If I actually have a look, this was a Temple of the Jade Serpent we did last night. And if I go to auras, is it gonna let me? No, it's probably not going to. Okay, let's see if I can't go back a bit. Temple of the Jade Serpent. That was the Shah fight. Can we do it? Nope, that's detail settings. We don't want that. We actually want the buffs. Aha, here we are. We got it to work. Right, so Azure Weave Vestment. Now, the tooltip is showing me the lowest amount of intellect, which is 208. This is your base craft, bottom quality variant. But over the course of the dungeon, you can see that I had 90 procs and 67 reapplications of it. So which meant that I had 15 minutes or 41% uptime of an intellect buff over the course of the key. Now, this is huge and is a massive benefit when it comes to things like passive damage, burst damage, when you've got to bear in mind that during these 15 minutes I was bursting, I was getting things like Netherportal out, I was doing work, and this is only going to improve and keep scaling. Intellect is always one of those stats that is going to keep getting better over the course of the expansion, whereas I suspect that haste will eventually find a point where it drops off, as usually the case is. Early expansion we need haste, but as we get to the end of an expansion, haste starts dropping off in favor for intellect, mastery, even crit, and we start wanting to diversify our stats because we have enough haste to make it matter. And it starts becoming a case of, oh shit, okay, I need 50% mastery now rather than 40, because that ekes out an extra 10% damage on our pets. Which is kind of the reason behind my Azure Weave choice, because I prefer intellect. It's going to be better long term. And having 41% uptime on it over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon, pretty nice. Does mean you get some really, really nice moments, but we'll discuss the kind of those nice moments when we get into what Demonology is actually good for now, rather than trying to chat about it during the gear. So, the tier set, what does it do for Demonology then? Because we've kind of discussed the gearing options and how that plays around with things. Because obviously, if you're going to run the Tailoring 2 set, that means you have to run the other 4 pieces of tier gear. And for me, that means that my shoulders are locked out, despite the fact that I am currently carrying the shoulder tier set. Now, if I end up in a position where I get the helm and the gloves take me forever and a day to get, I can either hold out until January to get the gloves when we get the creation catalyst, or I may pivot if there's enough sparks of sparks to craft the Chronocloth set, and then I'll just pivot to the Chronocloth, which will be doable. It's not great, don't particularly like the idea, but I'll do it if I have to. I'm hoping against hope, that we actually get the gloves either this reset or in the vault. But anyway, so back to the tier set itself. So, for Demonology, what does it do? Well, the 2 set increases Demon Bolt and Fellstorm damage by 20%. Nothing huge, nothing fancy, but you do feel its damage. It came in for me at about a 1700 DPS increase over the course of fights for raiding. And the 4 set, Demon Bolt has a chance to make your next Hand of Gul'dan instant cast and deal 150% increased damage. Now, this doesn't make it free. That's the key thing you've got to remember. It's still going to cost you shards. So you're still going to want to be wary of whether or not you've got 3 shards, 2 shards, 5 shards, or 1 shard. Because let's face it, we don't want to be casting 1 shard Hand of Gul'dans. And this is going to be the one downside of this being live. But I wanted to try and do this a slightly different way and see how you guys like it versus my old style of editing. Because unfortunately I've been under the weather, which meant that obviously these videos are behind where they should be. So, yeah, the tier set itself, it's nothing flashy, it's never going to look flashy, because the changes to the specs that we've had coming into Dragonflight mean that Blizzard want essentially simple tuning knobs while everyone gets the hang of their specs. I suspect that come Season 2 or the next tier of raiding, we're likely to see slightly more complex tier sets that might start seeing certain talents take to the fore, for instance. But with both the tier sets and crafting aside, because if you go with the Elemental Lariat, you can go for something like a crafted weapon or crafted ring, or even something like a vibrant craft cuffs or things like that for tailors, because you're limited to 2 what's known as embellished crafting pieces. Now, what are embellishments? Well, if you come down here, you can see that more powerful epic crafts will have this unique equipped embellished, and then 2, which harks back to like the old Warlords of Draenor crafting system, where you'd have a limit on how much. The difference is, if you don't have an embellishment or an effect on it, because this is what you've got to remember, when it says embellished, it basically means it's had an effect tied to the gear. Because if we go down to, or go up, sorry, to the Vibrant set, you can see that this is an epic craft, but there's no embellishment, because we can add the embellishment as an optional reagent. What this means is you could, in theory, with enough sparks of ingenuity down the line, literally just craft yourself a full set of epic gear using the Vibrant Wildercloth set until you get your tier, and then just not have to worry about embellishment restrictions. But if you decide that you actually want, you know what, no, I kind of want this, this helm, for instance, Hood of Surging Time. So damaging a new enemy grants you 172 haste for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. This helm, on paper, is huge. Not only does it have a huge amount of haste and versatility on the helm anyway, but the fact that this gives you a huge burst of haste at the start of packs is great, especially from a Mythic Plus setting, because it's when you damage a new enemy. So say if you're if you Dreadstalkers implode and then go into a AoE rotation, you're going to be benefiting from nearly 700 haste as a bonus, which is nice, and that's consistent. That's every pack pull, especially if you're constantly pulling into AoE packs, whether it be, Halls of Valor. Halls of Valor is quite good because you generally got 4 to 5 mobs per pack that you pull generally. Or, Shadowmoon Burial Ground, or, the older dungeons that are a little bit faster paced. Court of Stars, really good example as well. Quite a fast-paced dungeon and not many small pulls in there either. Whereas for the bosses and tyrannical weeks, this helm might actually drop off quite a lot because you don't have lots of new things to hit. It's not like the bosses aren't spawning lots of adds during the fight. The only exception to this might be Knocker Defensive's last boss, when it spawns the 4 new adds that you need to kick and you need to kill quickly, and that's a priority to kill. But this haste buff still isn't going to make a lot of sense during that fight. Comparatively, something like Amice of the Blue, your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to trigger a burst of arcane energy at the target's location, dealing 12,259 arcane damage split between nearby enemies. Again, this is basecraft, first rank, and as a result, really, really nice to aid in your AoE damage if you're playing a more single target focused build. But as you can see, because it's got an effect, it's embellished. But you can have that kind of flexibility moving things around if you're playing with the Elemental Lariat. If you're not playing with the Lariat and you're instead playing the Easier with Mantle and Slippers like I am, or the Robe, then you're limiting yourself in terms of your gear flexibility. Where you can make that up, however, and where it becomes really big, is when we discuss the trinkets. Now, obviously because Mythic Plus is out, we have quite a lot of strong trinkets. We have, if we pull it up, Dragonflight, Mythic Plus. Right, so we've got, in Halls of Valor, we have the Eye of Skorvald and the Horn of Valor. Both are really strong trinkets. Ignore the item levels. Blizzard's addition to the journal for the Mythic Plus things doesn't actually scale up to us. But you can see that the Horn of Valor, it's a 2-minute cooldown, much like it was in Legion, and it increases your primary stat by an amount for 30 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. This is nice. Very similar to what I'm currently using in the Iridius Fragment. The Iridius Fragment I got from a Mythic 0, and that's Notharis. And it's a mastery stat stick, but you gain the Titan's Crumbling power, increasing your intellect by an amount, and it's reduced each time you use the ability. Lasts for 20 seconds, 3-minute cooldown. Now, generally speaking, a 3-minute cooldown feels horrendous to use unless you're playing the Netherportal build for Demonology, and I'll discuss why afterwards when we actually get into the builds and the gearing, and how that ties into the gearing. But the Iridius Fragment, if you're going to be playing Demonology, go do Mythic 0 and get the Iridius Fragment, because it gives 2,572 intellect on use. And with Demonology in the way it plays and how we play quite slowly at the moment, we physically can't rot that down to 0 before it expires. I usually still have about 10 stacks of it left, which means it's still increasing my intellect by upwards of like 700 intellect by the time it expires. And when you've got things like Bloodlust and things like that, it's a really powerful trinket, even though it's only 372. Like, I do also have an Iceblood Death Snare. This I'm primarily using as the intellect stat stick for passive use, because I've not been very lucky with my other trinkets. But its on use is also quite handy. It's a bit of an AoE, adds a little bit more damage to the fight. It's not huge by any stretch of the imagination, but it was better than what I was using at the time. Now, in terms of passives though, things like the Eye of Skorvald, crit, stat stick, your ranged and attack spells have a chance to call down a Fell Meteor, really nice, does a considerable amount of damage. If we go back, you've also got Ruby Whelp Shell, it's not the greatest trinket in the world. It's actually pretty bad for us because its proc rate is so low, but as a passive stat stick, it'll do you until you can find better. Now, Tome of Unstable Power, it's a bit hit and miss. On paper, it sounds really good. A kiss curse effect, but it sounds good. In that, by reducing your crit, you increase your primary stat. Unfortunately, it's on a 3-minute cooldown, which means it's actually competing with things like Iridius Fragment. But what also makes the unstable power worse is the fact that it's split. Because it's you or your party members gain power, so they suffer the corruption. Which means that if you're stacked in any setting, you could be detrimental to the other people in your party, especially if they rely on crit for damage. I was having a conversation with one of my friends who plays Demon Hunter, and he was like, get that away from me. If you ever proc that near me, just don't. Because obviously they rely heavily on their crits in order to continue pumping out damage, because they have like a crit refund system. So, Tome of Unstable Power, it's an okay trinket, but not going to be one of the ones that you're really pursuing when it comes to things like Iridius Fragment, Eye of Skovald. Fractured Heart, it's an okay trinket. Personally, not had much experience with it, so I can't tell you for numbers, but your abilities have a chance to crystallize your target, inflicting 12,000 damage over 12 seconds. If the target dies while crystallized, they explode. So, realistically, the bit that you're going to have to focus on with this is just the main. Your spells and abilities have a chance to inflict 12k arcane damage dot to the target, and then if they die, it'll be a nice addition to the damage you're doing. It's not something that you're going to have to try and bank for, because it is just a flat passive. It's not a case of you can use this and time it, as has been the case in previous types of trinkets similar to this. So, Azure Vault, not the greatest play for trinkets, but if you need them, they're a good home gap. Same with Ruby Life Pools. Now, the Not Good Offensive does have Furious Rage Feather. Now, Furious Rage Feather is a whoppingly good trinket. Its passive effect is arguably one of our best, if not the second best, in terms of overall trinkets we can get for a passive design. Because your damaging spells have a chance to fire a Soulseeker arrow towards the target, inflicting 53,000 shadow damage over 20 seconds. If the target dies while affected, your next damaging spell will fire an arrow, which means that basically, if you put this dot on a target and that target dies, you are guaranteed to reapply this dot to your next target. Now, in Mythic Plus setting, this is great because it means that chances are you're always going to be having an arrow out, if not two. Because as far as I'm aware, it's not capped and it's just your spells and abilities have a chance to fire it out. Now, my friend Time does actually run this in his, and if we actually have a look, over the course of that same dungeon we did where I had 15 minutes of Azure Weave, he did 1.29 million damage as a healer with Soulseeker Arrow. Now, that was 200 hits, a 13% uptime, and on average, it was doing about 6,459 damage. Which means he was getting a few things to die with this on. And he's playing an Evoker, but he's not a hyper-aggressive Evoker. Like, yes, he's got some damage coming out with, like, Living Flame, Fire Breath, Deep Breath, Corporeal Tear. That is a ring that you can get from the Cobalt Assembly that I'll discuss in a moment. But you can see that that ring is on par with Soulseeker Arrow. It's really, really nice. If we actually come out of this for a moment and click me, you can see that my Corporeal Tear did nearly 2 million damage. So, with that kind of same proc rate and viability, we could probably be looking at maybe seeing about the same in terms of my Furious Rage Feather would be in about the same region, which, for a trinket, is bloody good. You can see also I've got a Pit Lord, so I'll discuss that shortly. Don't worry, we will get there. We will get there. So, yeah, Not Good Offensive, Furious Rage Feather, really, really good trinket. Now we get on to the time walking dungeons. You've got Court of Star, you've got Infernal Writ. Again, this is a really good trinket. Nothing's really changed from its old incarnation. It's an intellect trinket, but your damaging spells have a chance to grant you crit every second for 20 seconds, and it has, or had, a very high uptime when it was relevant, and likely still does to this day. So if we need the crit, it's good passive, it helps. You've obviously just got to bear in mind that crit as a stat on itself is a bit RNG. I suspect that the Infernal crit is actually going to be considerably stronger for things like Destruction, because of Destruction's tier set. But we're going to go into a guide and a couple of videos on Destruction in the coming week, because I really think Destruction's being slept on. Like, really being slept on by pretty much the majority of the community. And in those videos, I'll explain why and where we're going with it. I personally am going to be making a shift from a Demonology main to a Destruction main this tier, because I think it's actually going to be better in the long haul. So stay tuned for that and enjoy. But Infernal Writ will likely see a place in that guide and hold a prominent place, so I need to get hold of one. But going in, we've discussed Hall of Valor, we've got Skovald and Horn. Again, Skovald being a crit stick with a chance to call down a meteor doing fire damage. This is huge, especially when we consider rings that we have access to, so we'll discuss rings after this in a moment. But Eye of Skovald definitely synergizes really, really well with the raid rings. Shadowmoon Burial Ground, so much gear, it's unbelievable, but no trinkets. Lots of rings, bits and pieces, but it's kind of one of the problems of WoD. Lots of gear, not much substance. And then for Temple of the Jade Serpent, can't really see any loot. Again, the flipping thing just don't work. Right, let's see if I just set it to Heroic. Heroic, gear filter, all specs. And again, no trinkets. Couple of rings, which aren't too shabby. And the staff, again, the staff's not too bad. But unfortunately, Blizzard haven't sorted out the... Oh, there we go. We're in. Somehow we made it work. So yeah, you've got a couple of options, but Temple of the Jade Serpent isn't the most groundbreaking of dungeons in terms of gear. Now, the raid then, because the raid is kind of the bit that things are going to start linking back towards. And there's a couple of key pieces that are quite nice. You do have like main hand off hand combination from Razagath, and the Primal Council, or Kurogs, Grim Totem, and you've got a staff that drops off Teros, which isn't a too bad staff, but if you are going to go for a staff, the staff from Algathar Academy is just generally better. And although Algathar Academy isn't in the roster for dungeons, or sorry, it is, you can see here, Haste Mastery. So why did I say it wasn't? I don't know. I'm trying to do about 8 different things at once, I think, at this point. But anyway, back to the raid. Oh yeah, I'll just show you Neltharis. So you've got Spells of Neltharis, Corrupting Trinket. Oh, where is it? Oh no, I misspoke. The Iridius Fragment is from the Halls of Infusion, rather than the Neltharis, because Neltharis has the Spores of Neltharis, which is a bit like Zymox's cache for agility users. You open the spores and loot the first item you gain, gaining its fleeting power, increasing a secondary stat by 2,116 for 20 seconds, 2-minute cooldown. This is gonna be nice, and when it becomes our thing in Season 2, it is going to be one of the things we pursue, because it's either going to be 2,000 haste, 2,000 crit, 2,000 verse, and it's just going to slap, especially when you start linking it with things like you just using your Grim of Felguard and going into a 1-minute Tyrant build. I suspect that kind of me running the 1.5-minute Tyrant build is more susceptible to Iridius Fragment rather than thing. An Erupting Spear, again, quite a nice trinket. Now, obviously, Iridius Fragment, Mythic 0, I can't upgrade it. I might try running it again to see if I can get a base one to be upgraded with Valor, but that's for an experiment another day. Anyway, back to the raiding before we like massively derail this video. So, we were talking about the rings and how the Eye of Scorvald and the fact it does fire damage is going to be really strong. And the reason for that is these two very rare rings. You've got Seal of Durnia's Chosen, which drops from Eranog, the first boss, and dealing fire damage has a chance to ignite your enemies, burning them for an additional 4,858 damage every 2 seconds. This is obviously normal. If we set it to Mythic, and scroll all the way down, it becomes 7,252 damage every 2 seconds. This is just huge. Especially when you start looking at the fact that if we have the Eye of Scorvald and we're playing Destruction, we have a lot of fire damage, which then means that we're just going to be igniting the enemy, and Seal of Durnia's Chosen is just going to clap damage and take names, which is kind of where we're looking at. For Demonology, our chances to do fire damage are a little bit reduced, unless it procs off the fact that, like, our imps do fire damage. So, Fellfire Bolt from the imps. Is it going to tell me its damage type? No, it's... no. There we are. Right, so, Fellfire Bolt. Deal 366 fire damage to a target. So, doing Durnia's Chosen for the ring is going to rely on you using imps. Like, heavily rely on you using imps rather than constantly sacking them off or imploding them. But this is fine, because what this does is basically going to further augment how much your imps are impactful. Like, you can see that they're still my third top damaging ability. And this is just, you know, wild imps being out and about. But we'll lead into the talents in a moment. Don't worry, we're nearly there. Bloody hell, 31 minutes. Yeah, we're nearly there, folks, don't worry. So then you've got the Seal of Final Duty. Now, this is a really good statted ring. It's haste mastery, which is really nice for us. And dealing fire damage has a chance to invigorate you, absorbing 63,000 damage for 6 seconds. Now again, remember, this is off your imps. So your imps are always going to be doing something. They're always going to be throwing out damage. Pretty much always you've got imps out. I'm currently running in a demons, so I'm not even in combat, and I just had 2 imps out. And that kind of says a lot, really, in terms of just how much, and when you consider that we're going to be having like 30-40 imps out, well, maybe not that many, but a good number, probably 10 to 13, I think at the moment is the realistic amount. They're all going to be casting firebolts. You're likely to have a huge amount of defensive utility just through this ring, and it's well statted as well. You know, like Warlocks needed to be even tankier. In terms of other rings that we have options to us, a good one to get early will be the Assembly Scholar's Loop. I did release a video discussing how to get this, but this damaging proc is really nice, and is a nice bit of extra padded damage. It's crit haste, so it's not the greatest stat stick in the world, but again, it has haste on it, which at the moment is our linchpin, I think, in terms of doing damage. The rest, though, you're kind of just looking at trying to utilize your rings to get the stats you need once you sim things through. If you need help simming things, please do comment below, and I'll discuss how to sim again for the newer players among you. Now, on to the important part, the big part. And this is where people might want to take notes, start thinking, or, you know, comment below and let me know that, oh, Ori, you've been an idiot, I don't believe this works. And at which point we can have a lovely discussion. So, if this video's helped you at all at any stage, please do hit the subscribe, hit a like, let me know. But let's get into the talents themselves. So you can see this build is kind of set up as my AoE Mythic Plus build, and you can see one huge big glaring obvious thing in the fact that I don't have Infernal Command or Guillotine in this build. And this is because I've done a lot of playing around. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go around to my fuck around and find out set, because this particular build is where I primarily pull everything out, reshape it, and kind of save things here and there. So, comment below once we finish this section which of the guides you, or which of these builds, sorry, you want copies, links for, and I will then craft them, share them, and paste them somewhere for you guys, even if I have to use something like Wowhead to do it. because these are always going to be bounced around and changed as I'm still working things out, because this isn't concrete. This is just all the information I've collated in the last few weeks and put here in video format for you guys to try and hopefully help you. So, I've discussed the class tree to no end. In terms of what's important, your big takeaway, you have a few key damaging talents that you need to care about. You want to take 2 points in Demon Skin, 2 points in Fell Armor. You have to take either Howl of Terror, Mortal Coil, and Curse of Enfeeblement. You have a choice. You then, realistically, for benefit, you have to take Demonic Embrace, Demonic Empowerment, Wrathful Minion, and Demonic Fortitude. They're just have to takes. You then have a row of options. 9 times out of 10, you're going to be taking Sweet Soul, Demonic Gateway. Dark Pact pretty much becomes a must take. Frequent Donor versus Ichor of Devils, your choice. Strength of Will versus Dark Accord, again, your choice. Shadow Fury, almost pretty much going to be an always take. Lifeblood as well, for that. You then have 1 point to divvy up and put wherever you like. 9 times out of 10, my recommendation is going to be Fiendish Stride at the moment, because everyone wants to go fast. Your then next thing that you need to pick up is Soul Link, and then you need to pick up, for a damaging perspective, you have to pick up Grimmer of Synergy and Soul Conduit. Now, that leaves you 6 points to play around with whatever else you like. You can go for Inquisitor's Gaze for a minor damage increase, although Inquisitor's Gaze is going to get changed in the new year when 10.05 comes out. Blizzard have already announced that both Summon Soulkeeper and Inquisitor's Gaze are going to get a slight rework, because Blizzard don't like the fact that Inquisitor's Gaze is basically just a buff that everyone's using as a fire and forget. You put it on, you forget about it for an hour, you crack on and keep going, and Summon Soulkeeper seems massively undertuned for what it does. So, both of these are going to look to get a rework, and if the rework is huge and drastic, I will release an update on those two. But for the rest of your talent points, you have 5 points that you can really allocate wherever you want. The main takeaways from this is if you want to do damage, you want Demonic Inspiration, you want Wrathful Minion, you want Soul Conduit, and you want Grimmer of Synergy. They're your takeaway. So you need these 4. Anything else is entirely up to you, whether you want to go more defensive, you want your more utility, you want to stick points in Banish and Greater Banish so you can banish undead targets now, or along with Demons, Aberrations, and Elementals, or if you want to put 2 points in a Snare for your Fear, because that might be handy if you want more movement speed, you want to be able to kite things, whatever it is. My recommendation, though, would be to put a point in Soulburn so you can relocate gateways, buff health stones, drain lives, things like that. Gives you that little bit of additional survivability. Put your extra point in a Fiendish Stride, so Burning Rush is now 50% faster and does less damage to you. Oh no, sorry, it's 10% faster, but does 50% less damage to you. And then you've got 3 points to spend wherever you like. Fell Synergy and Profane Bargain. Something like that. If I just reset, you can see that I've taken my points out of Profane Bargain, and I actually have the Dark Fury Stun. But this is because I was... the reduction in Shadow Fury Stun actually comes in handy for a few raid bosses. Now, for the plethora of Demonology builds that we have, this is really going to boil down to how you think and what you perceive to be the main focus of your build in what you're doing. Now, Demonology is really, really good at passive cleave. We can do that anyway with not a lot of problems. We have our Dreadstalkers can AoE, our Fell Guards are going to Fellstorm anyway, our Imps, we can implode them if we want, we can do a lot. But it's where you want the focus to be. Now, Netherportal, and this particular left bottom wing, as we've discussed countless times now, is more of a single target focus, whereas Infernal Command, Guillotine, in this right lower quadrant is for your AoE. Now, if you're running Mythic Plus a lot, as I am currently, during my spare time, I am running with a Monk and a Demon Hunter. And the Monk has Foresight, which is why if you look down in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I have got absolutely stomped on by my friend Stitch. The dude has his 4-set, and in terms of the AoE damage he can provide, it's a little bit ridiculous. Which means that for me personally, and for us if I'm playing Demonology, the strength I bring to the table, same if I'm playing Destruction while I've been playtesting that out as well, is primarily the boss damage or the single target damage, because I can comfortably hit 70, 80, even 90k with everything aligning, and I will then be able to hold the majority of that fight miles ahead. So like if we go to Leave Flameheart, yeah, so Leave Flameheart, boss fight, third boss of Temple of the Jade Serpent, I finished the fight on 35k, nearly 36k. I finished the fight there, so I'm coming down after all of my cooldowns, and Stitch is kind of coming up, and he's got tier set, whereas my friend Ark, who is a demon hunter, doesn't have his 4-set yet. He's still working on that, and is primarily more of a AoE focused spec. He's on 18.1. Which means that obviously my priority there is to bring in the single target damage. Now, if we go to Lorca Stone Snap, you can see that that's a much faster swap fight, and as a result, Stitch did a lot better. But then Wise Mari, I ate the dirt, which was poor play on mine. But again, opening the fight early on, I did a lot more damage and then just got shafted. But for my playstyle and the way I'm playing, it's generally much better for me to be playing a much more single target focus than it is for anything else. So like, in terms of damage on me, there's a few ways to play around the Nether portal. Now, depending on where you look, and kind of how it is you go about this, you've got options. Now, what some people do is they try and go down a route where Implosion's going to need to be picked up, that's going to need 1 point, we're going to need points there, and we've got 2 points. I'm trying to think. I don't particularly like this build, which is why it's taking me a second to think about where to put these points. I think it's Shadow's Bite. Is it Shadow's Bite? Do they have 2 points in Demons, or do they have Felsunder? I think it's this. I think. Someone go check Wowhead and let me know if I've got this right, because I don't like this build. Looks like this. This is kind of like your Netherportal build, essentially. And the reason you've got something like this is because you've got your Grim of Felguard, you've got your Summon Vile Fiend, and you're going into this Nether portal, and you've got both Power Siphon, Inner Demons, and Fell Covenant. Now, Fell Covenant is Balefight's burning core, so your Shadow Bolt increases the damage of your Demon Bolt by 15%, and then you've got Sacrifice Souls, so your Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt deal 4% additional damage per demon you have summoned. And then Shadow's Bite, when your summoned Dreadstalkers fade away, they increase the damage of your Demon Bolt by 10%. Now, this build, on paper, is going to be really nice. Like, really nice. Especially when you consider that our 2-set itself buffs the damage of Demon Bolt. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the target dummies and we're going to demonstrate it. So, park here, buff that. Right, so we're going to wait for our 2 imps to spawn because we want a Power Siphon and we want both of these imps to become ours. So we're going to do that. We're now going to target our duelist, make sure our pet's on a assist, and then we're going to go into it. So it's Shadow Bolt, Nether Portal, Vile Fiend, Doombolt, Shadow Bolt, Felguard, Dogs. Unfortunately, we let one expire. We're then going to Tyrant just before our Nether Portal expires. We're going to hand a Gul'dan, and then we're also going to Tyrant and Iridius Bolt Fragment as well. And we're just then going to make sure that we don't let anything expire. We're going to power, siphon, so that we have our Doom Bolts. And then we're just going to continue this, and we're kind of looking to maintain our buffs as we go on. And you can see that I don't have Bloodlust. There's nothing fancy here, and we're doing about 53k damage. It's okay, it's not great, but it's a good amount of just passive damage, essentially, and it's kind of going to maintain itself quite well. Because you can see that we're keeping this. We've got lots of pets out, and our Doom Bolts are doing about 25, 26k per cast. An average of 31k over all of our casts, which is nice. It's a good amount of damage, and it'll see you through. The problem is you do have a buff to maintain in kind of Fell Covenant. The problem with Fell Covenant is the fact that you have to make sure that you're getting these Shadow Bolts in, and sometimes that's not always going to be the case, because as you saw, in order to try and make sure that we kept Shadow Covenant and we didn't overcap shards, I actually ended up losing a proc of core. That partially could have been to the fact that I was talking and I wasn't acting as quickly, and I was trying to think things through, so I was a little bit slower, but I don't think I was slow enough to completely quantify that. Now, my preferred way of building this is if we come out of this and go into Imp Gang Boss. Now, I prefer Imp Gang Boss over Fell Covenant because I prefer the fact that my imps do more damage. Now, obviously, one of the problems of doing this live is the fact that we're going to have to wait a couple of minutes as like Netherportal resets itself, because this is going to be another Netherportal video or moment. But if we do that, do this, and go. You can have Warlock's Grand Design, or you can have Reign of Tyranny for this. It's entirely up to you. Warlock's Grand Design or Wilfred's is going to allow you to have more Tyrants often through the fight, but you're going to see moments where they don't necessarily sync up great, and because we're doing that whole juggling 3 different cooldown lengths, 1/1.5 minute, a 2 minute, and a 3 minute cooldown, you kind of end up in this situation where things get really messy in terms of where you want a Tyrant, or where you want a Nether Portal, and why you're Nether Portaling as well. So generally speaking, what my playstyle is if you're going to play Netherportal and you're going to have Demonic Tyrant, generally what I'll do is I'll actually save my Grim of Fell Guards for Nether Portals, which means that I'll get 2 Tyrants in. I'll get a big Tyrant, little Tyrant, and then coming into that 3rd Tyrant again, it'll be big Tyrant. So you go big, small, big, middling, small, big, middling, small, essentially, and you're kind of working it through like that. But generally speaking, a lot of the fights at the moment, especially in a raid setting, don't last long enough in order for you to get a second Nether Portal off anyway. Most of the time they don't even, from a raid perspective, they're usually lasting somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, at least in the pulls we've done, which means that I've got a Nether Portal in during the middle of the fight, so it's making sure you best optimize that, rather than necessarily getting as many in as you can. Razagath is a really good example of this. It's where's the best place to get all your cooldowns in, or do you just hit all your cooldowns as often as possible? Now, obviously I've got 2 points left, and the real question is at this stage is where do I put them? And for single target, we put them here. And Tauren Armaments and the Expendables. We'll apply the change. And then again, for the sake of Netherportal build discussion, we'll discuss that. And then we'll go into the Guillotine, and then we'll wrap this video up, because I think that kind of covers everything for you guys, and I appreciate this video is already approaching an hour mark. But, as I say, I wanted to try and keep this as quick as possible, while also having that live vibe as we've been doing with recent videos. So, let's have a quick reset. We're going to do that. We're going to Power Siphon quickly before our second imp expires. We're going to Shadowbolt, Nether Portal. Pet should really be attacking at this stage. Right, so what I did there was I changed the order of all my casts slightly so as to better utilize everything. So you might want to like go back and check the streamer action that I did, but you can see that by playing it this way, I have imp gang bosses that are regenerating me more imps afterwards. Which means you could probably play Sacrifice Soul with this as well, but when these imps expire... See if I can't find something. Nope, all the pets expired. But basically, the expendables and the way it works is when an imp dies, we're ending up in this position where our other pets are increased. They have their damage increased. Now, because our Felguard is out constantly, he is just constantly going to be at 10% increased damage. Just the entire time. Paired with Antoran armaments, Anilian training, and things like that, he's just going to clap like a truck. Now, if you give me one moment, I'm being pestered. So... Right, so... Now we should be out of combat, so come on, pet, over here. So yeah, by having wild imp gang bosses, our imps do a substantial amount more damage, because we just generally have more of them. Now, if we compare the two, you can see here, so you've got Demon Bolts doing 349k, Dreadbite 265 and 262, and then if we go down to the current, we end up with our imps doing 334k-ish, and our Fellstorm from our Felguard also doing more damage, because remember, he's getting buffed. And this takes into account normal Fellstorm and also Demonic Strength Fellstorms, which are buffed. Personally, I prefer it this way. It's also quite nice as well, because if you decide that you want to play a Mythic Plus variant of this build, you can actually drop a point out of Felsunder, go Implosion, and if you want Dreadlash over Summon Vilefiend, you can do, and it's not really a problem. What I'm kind of playing around with at the moment, though, is dropping this, putting a point there, and just not having Shadow's Point, so I'm actually running Soul Strike and Dreadlash. Soul Strike versus Summon Vilefiend is a bit of a choice depending on where you want. Now, generally, because I play this build, as I say, rather than Sacrifice Souls, having Soul Strike is beneficial because it does cleave slightly. Remember, Antoran Armaments means that Soul Strike is going to do 25% of its damage to nearby enemies. Now, that's, you know, it's not a huge amount of damage, but it's nice. And also, Soul Strike has the additional benefit of being able to, as a way to fast swap your pet. So if a pack's about to die and you see the tank rolling off, preemptively targeting something that the tank is, like main assisting it, and then hitting Soul Strike is going to force your pet to just forget about whatever the hell he was just doing and yeet. Which is when having things like Teachings of the Black Harvest is going to be nice because it helps with your uptime. Now, this is kind of where we start getting into that whole, you need to decide as a player and kind of think about how you want to play. Because dropping out of Netherportal and going the Guillotine route, we have options. We have many options. Because you're obviously going to want Implosion. You're going to want to come down to Dread Calling. So I'd probably pick 2 points up into Inner Demons and go Dread Calling. And then we've got this situation. We've got 2 points to spend. Where the hell do we put them? Now, there's options. Now, obviously, when I last discussed this video pre-Season 1 in terms of gearing spec, we actually had it like this. Which then brought us down to here. We picked that up. We had this. We then put points into here. We had that. And we had a build that looked like this. Now, this build is it's a good build. you've got your procs for Demonic Calling, you've got your Shadow's Bite, you've got your Dreadlash, you've got a little bit of everything that's going to help with most situations. But again, there are some people that are advocating you just don't bother putting points there. You have something that looks like this, so you've got the reduced cooldown on Fellstorm by 10 seconds, so it becomes a 20-second CD. You've got Felsunder as well. You've still got your Guillotine, your Tyrants, you've got your Imps. All in all, either of these two builds work. It's just whether or not you want the chance to proc free dogs, essentially, which then allows you to go into more handle cooldowns and things like that. But this is kind of the most popular Guillotine spec I've come across and seen. So, for the sake of keeping this video as short as I can, while still having it be your compendium and totally in-depth video, we're just going to discuss this. So let me just move a couple of abilities around on the bars, because I know it's here somewhere. Guillotine. Right, let's just put that there. Right, so because we're in a position where we're probably going to say that we need Teachings of the Dark Harvest, we'll pull the point out of Dark Fury, say this is a Mythic Plus build, and sit here. So our pet's now got a faster pursuit with a longer range, also has the shorter Fell Might, which means that in terms of hitting the target dummies, we are now going to hit these ones. So we have choices. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to send our boy in at 5 shards. We're going to do that, we're going to do that. We're going to Orabot once, hand to go down. We're then going to there, and this. Now, with Demonic Strengthening to fully reset everything while the buff is going on. Now it's expired, we then drop Guillotine, Iridius Fragment, and then we throw everything in. And the reason we want to make sure that the buff is up before we Guillotine is the fact that Guillotine is Shadow Flame damage. And that means we want the dogs out, but not only do we want the dogs out, we also want to make sure that our Felguard benefits from his own buff that he's essentially throwing out. So these things are taking increased damage from your pets, and Guillotine is 2 parts component. The first part is obviously the Pulsing Shadow Flame AoE that's buffed by your dogs, but the second half is the fact that your pet just attacks 50% faster unarmed, and that cleaves, which, as a byproduct, is buffed by his own actions. And the reason I've continued this going is because we're just coming up to another stage. So we're going to Demonic Strength, and I'm going to demonstrate like how they overlap. So it's just about to expire, and then you throw it out. And you can see that this is a 5-target situation. We're static, and we're still holding above 100k, and I haven't really imploded. Like, I implode there just to round things off, but then if we pull out, and pull our pets out and set to passive, just let them passively do the rest of the work. You can kind of see that Fellstorm has done 2.42 million damage, Handigal Dance, Implosions, our Fellfire Imps, and our Fell Explosions here. So 2 casts of Guillotine have done 335k, which is quite nice, does good, but it also has Fiendish Wrath as well. Now, Fiendish Wrath is the punching side of this, so when you add these two together, the Fell Explosion and Fiendish Wrath, you're looking at about 500k damage. So a 5 target count, 250, you're looking at about 50k per target. That is just very, very fast pen and paper math, but again, kind of to show it, we're not going to bother with the rest of the cooldown. What we're going to do is we're going to wait for this Fellstorm to come out. It hits 5 stacks, hits that 7-second timer, and then we immediately Guillotine. So you end up with this situation, and then if you want, you can Demonic Strength immediately afterwards, and he goes back into it. Now, personally, out of the two, what I'd probably say is try and just get Demonic Strength out first, rather than let him normal Fellstorm, but sometimes that's not always going to be the case. But you can see that even then, tying those abilities together, Fellstorm, Dogs, Legion Strike, Fell Implosion, things like that, we're still looking at a huge amount of damage through our Felguard. And this is because of that interaction between Guillotine and Fellstorm. So, all in all, it's quite good. It is going to be a bit of a problem to sync them together, but if you're going to run Fell Might, you're looking at getting 2 normal Fellstorms in for every Guillotine. Because obviously it's a 20-second cooldown versus a 45-second cooldown. So it's Fellstorm lasts for 4.3 seconds, which means that you're looking at a essentially 25-second cooldown, which means that you're going to have obviously 25, 50, and then 45 seconds as your Guillotine, which is quite nice because it overlaps. And with Demonic Strength as well, always just line it up beforehand. And then you're just going to laugh as the packs are shredded. The only downside to this build, and again, I'll reiterate it, is if your tanks do not stand still. If your tank decides to just yeet out of hell and just pull the mobs out of your Guillotine area, you are going to be losing damage. At which point you have a choice to actually just move this point and put it somewhere else. Like if you want, you could throw in Pact of the Imp Mother and just completely and utterly can Guillotine off. Now, Pact of the Imp Mother gives your Hand of Gul'dan a 5% chance to basically cast itself for free for the second time, basically replicating your already existing cast, which just means more imps. More imps to implode, more imps to buff, more imps to basically cause havoc with, thanks to Imp Gang Boss. Now, hopefully you've liked this video. Hopefully this video has helped you in some way, and when we have a consistent raiding schedule again after the Christmas break, I will be releasing the POV raid versions of things as well, and I will probably be looking at trying to get the destruction video out in the next day or so as well. So hopefully we can make use of the Christmas break and my time off to get these videos out. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you have, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one. And again, hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year. Take care, folks. Have a good one.